We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. So welcome everyone to this, the second webinar. I know Carol or someone in her group said they were going to join, but when she comes, we will just welcome her. And those of us who weren't here, I think everyone here was here last time, 2 weeks ago. So everybody goes on mute until they're ready to talk, and then they can, you know, come off of mute. I don't know if Rob wants to share this time, or Gwen. Pretty informal is how we did it last time. So
yeah, I don't want to chair particularly. No, Gwen can do it.
We'll both do it. How about that? We'll all join hands and do this.
We'll all join hands. Okay. So I mean, this is not a lecture, as you guys know. We want to know how you're getting on, and any particular questions or experiences you want to share as you've been thinking about how you can apply what you've learned to your daily life. So the floor is open for anyone to make a comment or ask a question of any of us.
I would just make a suggestion. We could say Gwen S, Gwen E.
Gwen L and Gwen E?
Gwen S, that's me, S is in Sam, and E, perhaps.
All right, so Gwen E and Gwen S. So Gwen E is Gwen Etter-Lewis, and Gwen S is Gwen, what's your last name again, Gwen?
Samuels.
Samuel. Samuels, great, thank you. Okay, well, I'm gonna go on mute now, and let's see what we can see.
Huh? Yeah, stay mute. So.
Well, if we're all mute, no one will have anything to say.
I had a question. If anyone can speak to the question about how did these two phases of colonialism intersect with the enslavement of African people? For some reason, my mind is just not comprehending the question, or I don't know how to answer it. So if anybody has any input about that question, how did these two phases of colonialism, what two phases of colonialism and how they intersect with the enslavement of the African people? Was the first question on unit 3.
Yeah, this is not something I know anything about, I'm afraid, so I can't help about that particularly. I don't know the history of the period.
I'm looking up the question now on the course, so.
I didn't see any blogs about it. I could just go ahead and put it up on a blog too and see if anybody has any.
And I don't exactly know.
Okay. You're referring to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Gwen.
No, you.
I was saying, I think she's referring to the chattel slavery and then afterwards American imperialism, correct? That was one of the questions in one of the units?
In unit 3, right.
Yes.
So the two phases would be the chattel slavery and then the imperialism.
Well, it seems to me that the way they connected is that they were similar, except that the latter, the imperialism, was kind of sanctioned by law. How can I say it? Slavery also was a law, but then once it was abolished, they made ways continue slavery economically as opposed to legally and militarily. I think that maybe is a partial answer at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way to look at that. And I think, if you could if we look at the Jim Crow laws, for example, some of those laws were on the books and some were not. It was just an understanding that Black people could not share public facilities with whites. And so I think that's another way that those two phases intersected with one another. And I would also like to suggest that that's simply a way to conceptualize this history that we have, to say it's in two phases, but there are always other ways too to kind of look at it.
Okay.
Yes, I checked it out, and it's referring to settler colonialism in the first place, and then slavery. And the second wave, it's noted here, is often called modern colonialism.
Okay, that's helpful.
So it
Thank
says
you.
here that both were built upon and contrasted with the first wave of colonialism perpetrated by Europeans against the indigenous peoples of the Americas. And then it goes on, how did these two phases of colonialism intersect with the enslavement of African peoples? So yeah.
Okay.
As I understand it, also, when people first arrived, the Europeans first arrived in Virginia, of course, they brought indentured servants over from England as well, which were basically white people who had to serve a term of service of, I don't know how long it was, 6 years or 14 years or something, before they were free and independent people. So when Africans were first imported, they were imported to some extent to be indentured servants. But over time, there became issues of sort of differentiating between the white people, who were also, of course, Protestant, and they were of English culture, and people who were not of that skin color or of that culture or of that religion. So there was an us and other, and that caused the colonial laws gradually to increase the restrictions on the Africans, to the point where you had the children of slaves being slaves as well, which I think wasn't necessarily the case in the very early period of time. Certainly it wasn't in Roman period of time that the children of slaves weren't necessarily slaves and that sort of thing, or in Islamic law for that matter. So the laws gradually became more and more harsh, and the distinction between white indentured servants and black slaves became clearer and sharper, as I understand it anyway. But I haven't studied the period all that much. I just sort of read a little bit of Genovese, I think.
Thank you.
And I must say that when we talk about the history of slavery and the history of Jim Crow laws and so on in 2018, I just have the eerie feeling that we're reliving those same times. Does anyone else feel that way?
Yes, I do.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
I was just reading today about incarceration and felony. If you have a felony, what the criteria are after you're released from prison to be able to get your voting rights back. And as I look back over, I live in Tennessee, so as I look back over the laws in Tennessee, I noticed that each year the laws get a little more broad, so that it's excluding more and more, so that law is excluding more and more people from getting their voting rights back.
Yeah.
Very disappointing, yeah. So it seems like the laws are manipulated to create white empowerment.
Same here in Ohio. There was a law just passed that allows the state government to purge the voting rolls if you haven't voted in a certain amount of time. And I grew up in Tennessee. That's my home state. So, you know, it's quite interesting, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a trend, because I can't remember where it was from, if it was about North Carolina or Tennessee, but I had gotten an email recently, you know, people will email you about signing such and such petition and so forth. And there was a protest that was being started. It was either Tennessee or North Carolina, but against exactly what Linda mentioned, this effort to disenfranchise people. Yeah. Can I just make a kind of a personal comment, but it's related to what we're talking about? I mentioned in my biography, or whatever, my description, my bio of myself, and maybe in some of my writings, about how I was a descendant of Minorcan Spanish on my father's side. And they settled, they came here originally to the New World as indentured servants with the British. They were Minorcan people, but the Minorcans were kind of like second-class citizens in the Spanish kingdom as well, very poor. So they came here as indentured servants, and they mixed freely amongst the Africans there as well. And I just got an article from my daughter this morning that was talking about how, it says here, a newly excavated settlement highlights Florida's history as a haven for escaped slaves. Because what the Spanish wanted to do was, in order to keep Florida, they wanted to populate it. So they said that any slaves that would cross the border from the deep south, you know, the Carolinas, Georgia, and so forth, they would give them their freedom, plus they would give them land, and they would give them the right to vote. So actually, they're just starting to discover that Florida was a haven. It was actually kind of part of the Underground Railroad, but going south. And so there were a lot of free blacks in Florida as well. And I think Fort Mose was mentioned in one of the questions that in that PBS thing that we had. So Fort Mose is right near St. Augustine. My family is from Amelia Island. There's a very rich and interesting history of kind of interracial mixing in that area. And not interracial mixing in the sense by force, by rape, as it happened in other colonies, you know, but willing.
Yes, that's very interesting. I think also in parts of South Carolina, similar along the coast, because I visited Beaufort and they have a institute down there, not the Louis Gregory Institute, but there's in one of the islands, I can't remember the name of it. But there's a Baha'i who's, I think, director of that institution. And in fact, she gave up Victoria Smalls. Victoria Smalls. You can probably Google her if you like. And yeah.
St. John's Island or Helena's, the St. Helena.
St. Helena or Helena.
Yeah, Helena. Yeah.
There's also a very interesting history of a people called the Meludgeons. And the Meludgeons are of uncertain origin, but they seem to be part African, part Native, and part European by background, and they live in the Appalachian area, southern Appalachia. And that's another very interesting example of people who got along fine and really formed their own culture, even though they came from multiple backgrounds. And of course, there's a very long history of Indian tribes welcoming in African slaves, and there are large numbers of African Americans now who also have Indian blood as a result of that. So there have been bright spots in terms of interracial understanding and collaboration, certainly.
I mentioned that the last webinar that we had, because on my mother's side, her grandfather was an Irish coal miner, and her grandmother was black, and many of the blacks that went into West Virginia also were fleeing from Virginia because Virginia was part of the Confederacy, and West Virginia wanted to be part of the Union. And by the way, we refer to ourselves as Afro-Latins.
Yes, I found it. It's a Penn Center on St. Helena, the Penn Center. So
I've never heard that term, Afro-Latин. That's marvelous.
Yeah.
Here's our picture. Charleston's International African American Museum, the Penn Center on St. Helena Island.
You got to share your screen if you want people to see it.
All righty. Let me share my screen. Oh man, my computer is so slow, but let me try this. Share screen.
It's mostly the artists that call themselves Afro-Latins.
Can you see it now?
Not yet. There.
There we go.
That's Victoria Smalls. She's a Baha'i. She's sister of a good friend of mine. So they, I think they sort of were born in that area and went up north and came back, and they have a large family, interracial, from an interracial marriage. And my friend also married someone of a different race. Yeah.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I did want to just say that the articles in 4, I guess, yeah, they were really upsetting. I mean, I tend to be the sensitive one anyway, but the ones about incarceration of Black women, and also that article where he critiqued the film 13th, and I think Hermione just commented on that this morning too. Maybe it was Hermione, I'm not sure. Someone commented on it this morning. But they were just you know how you can read things and they're just like, oh my gosh, very heavy to deal with.
Yes, I agree with that. The readings were very, very intense, for lack of a better word.
And I would like to ask if you think that this intensity, because, you know, as we go through the course, we all find things that upset us or, you know, cause us to lose sleep at night. So do you think the intensity in some of the units is off-putting for some people?
Well, it may be, but I think it's really important for people to understand the truth of what has happened and what is still happening. I think that most white people in general are very ignorant of a lot of the history and the things that are happening today, because we have that privilege of not having to think about it. So I think it's really important. Gwen and I had watched that movie 13th a few months ago, and we both thought it was really well done. But it's, yeah, it is intense, but I think it's important for people to be aware and acknowledge and to do something about it in their own way. Yeah, I think we are obliged to do that.
Are we, someone asked about getting links to the videos, but I see that some of them are on YouTube. So would we be able to freely access them if we want to do something, let's say at the Baha'i Center in Albuquerque?
Yes, I posted on that and on how to click through to YouTube. Most of them are on YouTube, so they are freely available. You can get the link. And anyone who wants a specific link, I can give it to you. But you can click through by clicking on the little YouTube icon on the bottom right of each video that's on YouTube.
Right. I think I got something from the Triangle Cluster this morning that they're showing 13th in one of the towns there in the cluster, which I thought was great. And that might be something we can even do and have a discussion afterwards about it.
I'd like to comment also about the difficulty of reading the information. But Gwen said something and I'm having trouble tracking tonight, but it was so helpful to me as well, that when I'm finding that my eyes are being opened as a result of moving through the process, and I'm beginning to really appreciate in such a higher level the intensity of the oppression and the white privilege. When you said the white privilege of not having to think about it, that really hit me as I was watching the movie The 13th last night. And it just reminds me that it's worth walking through the discomfort to me to move to increased awareness and increased motivation, and just increased understanding of how this oppression is happening in our government policies, how the judicial system is turning a blind eye, And I was thinking last night, how the transformation of our culture is just beyond my comprehension. Now, I guess, leaving that up to Baha'u'llah and doing our small parts as we move through this. But at the same time, being very active where we can be to transform issues. And I'm babbling right now, so I'm going to stop. But yes, I'm glad that we are walking through the process, even though it's discomfort. On a positive note, the brother of, oh gosh, the young man, help me with his name, I forgot it, who was incarcerated for 3 years. You know who I'm talking about, on the 13th.
Oh.
He was incarcerated for 3 years in solitary confinement for 2 years. His brother just announced 2 days ago, he's running for mayor of New York.
Wow.
So that, he, like his brother's death and his mother's death is not going to be in vain. He's doing what he can to transform the judicial system and the conditions of people who are so poor.
Mm.
And I think one real quick, and then I'm going to be quiet. But Linda, I just think that's that's an example of stories that we should continue to tell. That there's some bright spots. There's some things that we need to know about that are quite that put us in a happy place, but also it's doing something about a problem in a real positive way.
I think that, I guess the question that I have is, as Baha'is, when we talk about like persons running for elections and getting involved, in political movements and things like that is something that, we as Baha'is don't do. But at the same time, I feel that I need to get a clarification, because I heard someone once say that Baha'u'llah didn't say we couldn't be political. He said we couldn't be partisan. We couldn't join political parties. And so I want to clarify that distinction, number one. And once having said that, I want to know, what can we as Baha'is do in the political realm at the same time as that we're trying to build this new world? It seems like we can't just wait until that one is destroyed or it falls apart to start ours. We have to do something side by side, simultaneously, and working in cooperation with others who are advocates of justice. So does that make sense, what I'm asking? Yeah.
My personal take on that, and this is just me talking, is that there are a lot of civil groups that are not partisan that Baha'is can get involved with. I think at any level, I don't think there's any ban on getting involved with a group that is not a partisan group, that is working for civil rights. It depends on your situation. And what I see part of the role of the Baha'is is to, and I don't want to overuse this phrase, but elevating the conversation and thinking about the spiritual principles and how the conversation can be going in that direction towards what the spiritual principles are. Because then, you start thinking about solutions that are not merely shorter term or reactionary, or, based on tit for tat, or, really based on spiritual principles. I'm thinking it's a similar kind of situation to the concept of economics, and the spiritual solutions to economic problems. It's not something that the world and society generally has on their radar, that this spirituality and spiritual solutions could be the answer to economic problems. And in a similar way, I think it's not on the radar of people working for race unity, that the spiritual solutions are the answer. So bringing that into the attention in a of course nonpartisan, but also in an inclusive kind of way that is not you know, Baha'is aren't going to teach the world what to do, but you know, I think you all know what I mean and where I'm going with that. But that's my take on what Baha'is can do. And there's so many. There's no city or town you can go in where if you talk to the people, there's not people who are trying to get together. And I think with the experience that many of us have with groups like local assemblies, you know, we can use those skills and that experience, because what I found even in talking with people, they want to do something, they want to come together, and they don't know of a way of doing it without being partisan, being political, being, you know, piecemeal in their approach. You know, it may be just one segment of society that is saying, well, you know, it may be the whites, you know, or it may be the blacks, and it's difficult for both to come together, I have found. And I think that is what is needed, and what Baha'is can bring to the table is to make the conversation A, more inclusive, and B, more spiritual in terms of the solutions, and really bringing that long-term commitment and approach to it, because we have that hope in our heads and that vision of Baha'u'llah, which is really a blessing that we want to, you know, share with everybody. Just my take.
I know there are a lot of interfaith groups. I've been taking part in some interfaith groups, and those groups of people are very open to the elevated conversation and promoting, and probably even sharing some of this information at some of those kinds of meetings would be helpful, because I find that a lot of people who are immigrant to America don't understand how deep and how painful racism has been in our country, and they don't know the history of slavery and colonialism in our country, and so they really don't understand why people get upset about it, because they don't understand the complexity and how deeply rooted the problems are in our society.
And they often don't even understand that in many cases, their own immigration is also related to the same phenomena of, you know, the phases of slavery. And they don't necessarily make that connection, because once people get here, especially European immigrants, they can basically just blend in, you know, but for Asians and Blacks, for example, it's a lot harder. I think one thing that is really good about the faith, because often you have people who are, I want to say activists, but maybe very often they might belong to, you know, let's say the Democratic Party. They might be of a more left wing of the Democratic Party, or even belong to other smaller political parties. And I think it's important from these readings, we're seeing that it's both Democrats and Republicans that have taken part in, you know, these atrocities, the modern day ones, you know, more so, of course. But we have the independent well, first of all, we have the writings telling us that, you know, we can't be partisan, and telling us why, because they're divisive. And then secondly, we have the independent investigation of truth. And I think that bears repeating like a gazillion times. Like, what is this about? This is about an independent investigation of truth. What is the truth? What really happened in our country? And what's really happening right now? And then instead of voting a party, we vote based on what we know to be right, or who we know to be right. And I think explaining that to people who are partisan is something that will really help.
And you know, when we look at the history of the faith, we see that American women, Baha'is, participated in the suffragist movement, and the civil rights movement, and so on. So again, we have a history that we can draw on to help us stay active today.
We talked about this topic a little bit at Feast, and it was said that it was important to, yes, speak out, yes, be active, work for social change, and also be cautious to really investigate the group that you're getting involved with. So it's not blind emotion. Really know who the people are, what their plan of action is. You know, are they doing this just so they'll get arrested? Is there going to be violence planned? Because some of them are doing this apparently. Some groups are planning to be violent just so they get arrested to increase their coverage. So to be wise, and also to not identify ourselves as Baha'is publicly in the media, that we are here as Baha'is. Don't wear the Baha'i t-shirt. Go as an individual person. We're not representing the faith, we're representing ourselves at this event. So, but I'm glad to see more and more dialogue to clarify, because I think our community still has questions. So I would assume maybe other communities do have questions about how much we can do, what's appropriate. So thank you.
And again, this is deja vu. In the 60s, when we were in college, we were torn. We had these discussions late into the night about, as Baha'is, what we should do, how we should do it, when we should do it, all of those kinds of things. And once again, we're having those same discussions.
Because history is repeating itself too. Yeah, it feels, I said that to my husband this morning, it feels like the 60s again. And I'm excited about that because so many of us became Baha'is at that time. So I'm just looking for the positive, even though this can be difficult, and it can be a difficult time to go through. I just feel like we're on the edge of something that Baha'u'llah is putting us all here at this moment to address.
Yes, that's a very good question, and it's something that came up yesterday. I visited one of my groups, my mentor group, Carol. I thought she'd be here, but she's not here. And the question came up, like, you know, how soon, or how long will we be, you know, in this situation? Because it just seems, as you said, that deja vu, and you know, are we going to really go back in a circle, or you know, what's next is really interesting, and how fast and how hard and how, you know.
Well, I think one of the things it shows us is that in the 60s we were able to change laws and some hearts, but not enough hearts. And this time we have to change hearts and change the level of the culture, white culture, in ways that was not able to be done in the 70s. So all of that racism just simply hung on and festered, and it's been coming out rather vociferously publicly in the last 2 years. And indeed, there's no guarantee that it won't stop soon either, because we don't know how elections are going to work out. We don't know how the forces of, you know, darkness as well as the forces of good play out in our society. We really don't know how the Baha'i principles are going to be accepted by the vast majority of people, and it may very well be it'll take a time when a large number of people reject those principles before they realize the damage that results, you see. So it's very hard to say, what the future lies. But I think what we have to do is continuously uphold the principles of the faith and not be attacking people, but be upholding the principles. And sometimes those principles are going to be very controversial, and they're going to cause a certain amount of disunity unavoidably, because people are going to say, you're wrong and what you're doing is wrong. But we still have to do it.
Thanks, Rob.
Abdu'l-Baha tells us about crisis and victory, and that's that cycle, that's going to continually be happening, but hopefully as it's not circular, but it's spiralic, it's spiral, that we're going upward and closer to the light. You know what I mean? We're always going to descend back into darkness to a certain degree, but as we continue to ascend, towards the light, the victories will be greater and the crises will be fewer or not as intense. Could only hope.
Yeah, it's probably more like the crises will be bigger, but the victories will be bigger too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and this is why the emphasis on community building right now in the 5-year plan. I mean, this is the way we solve the problems. We have to actually help our neighbors build new structures and build a new society. And we start with the junior youth and the youth in particular, and try to build something new that will be inherited by them, and then they'll be able to build it even more. So this new strategy of the last 25 years of building community is, I think, really long-term the thing that will work.
I agree. Any more groups? Any groups have met? I think Hermione was in a group. Hermione, has your group been meeting or chatting online or anything like that?
Both.
Okay.
And one of the things that came out of our last face-to-face meeting, which was Friday, this past Friday, we meet every 2 weeks, we decided. And we talked about a number of different things, but we also decided that for our next meeting, each person would share with group members anything that struck them thus far in the course, whether it's the reading materials, comments that people have put forth, and responses to the comments. There could be something that struck you in that way, and we're going to share those at our next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks from this past Friday. And we're really looking forward to that. People were excited about it. It's nothing ingenious conceptually, but we feel excited about coming together with that particular purpose.
And possibly we could have some group projects coming out of this. And I mean, that project could be anything, and it could be a practical thing in your particular location or region. So,
well, we're looking to come up with a project. We talked about it briefly, but not in any detail yet. But that is our goal.
Thank you, Hermione. Anyone
You're
else
welcome.
in the group?
I just have a question. Do you at the Wilmette Institute have any type of a, I don't want to say network, but any type of a handle on what groups are doing around the country around racism, or is there some kind of a forum for sharing ideas of what various communities or LSAs or individuals are doing? And might that be a good idea to share it, you know?
I know the Office of Public Affairs in Washington, D.C. is trying to collect as much information as possible and to find out what is going on, because they want eventually, of course, to hold a race unity conference in Washington, D.C. But when they do that, they want to do it in such a way that as many non-Baha'i groups are intimately involved in the planning, organizing, and executing of the conference as possible. So they want to really get a sense of what is going on in the whole country, not just amongst the Baha'is, but amongst everybody, and to make contacts and networks so they can figure out how a conference that the Baha'is sort of help to create and sponsor can be as effective as possible in bringing about a change of culture. That, of course, is a very ambitious thing to try and do. So they're about as aware as anybody, I would say, what's going on. And there's two people who work full-time in the Baha'i office in Washington, D.C. on that subject. May Lample and, what's his name? I can't remember. P.J. Andrews.
P.J. Andrews, yes. They audited the first course
Right.
in February.
Right.
You know, it's an idea, it's a project. There are two things I think about this. Number one, I don't think that an online sort of initiative, even informational initiative at this stage, is going to be more helpful than local initiatives. I think that we need to kind of have our feet more wet first before we think about sharing, you know, the experiences that we've had. But that said, I mean, the Wilmer Institute could help, I think, in putting learners who have been in each course together in some way. You know, we could, if someone wants to set up, for instance, a Facebook group or some other kind of networking, we could contact everybody to say, you know, if you're interested, here is a Facebook page to join for people who have been working in this area. Because we are going to be, I think, having this course in future years more often. There's so much interest in it. So that's something that we could do if someone else wants to take the initiative to manage that Facebook page or other social networking group.
That you could like post ideas or projects that people are doing, or
no, you would. The people who have been in the courses would post. You wouldn't do the posting, but you would have that forum to post and to interact with others, because as I said, we had a cohort in February and we have you now. So the next time we run it, there'll be more people who will have gone through the same materials and may want to, you know, connect with people in different cities to see what is happening. So
just so weary of Facebook, though.
Yeah. Well, one thing we could do, we have, in addition to our courses, we have what we call discussion centers. We have a discussion center for climate change and sustainable development, for example, and everybody who completes those two courses are invited to join the discussion center and continue the discussion. We could easily create a most vital and challenging issue discussion center and invite people who have taken these two courses to click through and join it. It'd be very easy to do. And what we do is we give people, it's like a course, but you can self-register if you have what's called the enrollment key, which is basically a password. So we'd give everybody a password. They could go in and register for the course, and once they've registered for it for free, then they would receive all the postings that go out. And of course, they could regulate how they receive the postings. So we could always do that.
That would be a good idea because, I mean, I don't know if it's just urban legend, but I've just heard some things about people with Facebook pages that are very outspoken, have been targeted, and I'm just, like I said, I'm just a little bit leery about that, because I think that the Baha'is as well, if we become too active, even with some of these various interfaith groups, you know, we could easily become targeted. So I'd rather that it would be something a little bit more private, but that also, for example, let's say if Charlotte and I are going to do a program, we can post what we're planning on doing, and then afterwards give feedback about how it went. And then we could read other people's ideas of what they're doing, or even like artwork or poetry or things that we do. We could post them, and might be good ideas for us to share and keep the momentum going after the course is over.
Yeah. Yes, Facebook groups can be made private. You can have it so that only people who are approved, you know, can join. But I had forgotten that aspect that Rob just mentioned of having it in Moodle, like a course where there's a forum. So I think that's a great idea, and we could easily, as he said, do that. So
It has advantages and disadvantages. One advantage, of course, is that everybody already has a username and password and get into the system. The problem is that people don't like to have to log in all the time. So that's a problem. On the other hand, not everybody's on Facebook, and not everybody wants to be on Facebook too.
And I would also like to add that I use Facebook and Twitter in my classes, but they are closed private groups. So only those people who are approved can be in.
right.
So you mean Zuckerberg can't sell the information to Trump, right? Is that what you're saying?
But I like the idea of something coming out of these two courses that's ongoing and that helps us exchange information about what's going on in different parts of the country. And I think it's always encouraging to know that, for example, I'm in a small community, but I can find something other small communities are doing that we might be able to do. So I think it's very hopeful and inspiring to have that kind of option.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I wanted to ask Mary Lou and Cynthia if there's anything going on in your groups. Mary Lou, you've got a beautiful smile, and I saw your cat sashay across the screen a minute ago. But do either of you have anything in your communities that you might want to share?
There. Am I in? I live in Springfield, Illinois, and it is the capital of Illinois, for those of you who might not know, and extremely political. So Baha'is at all times in Springfield have to walk a tightrope between the political side and the other side. We've been working in racial unity since the beginning of our of the Baha'i community here in 1919. Next year it will be our 100th anniversary on May 23rd. So we're looking forward to that, as well as the birth of the Bab in October. We began with having Louis Gregory come at least 3 times to Springfield. And he corresponded with the Baha'is here. The Baha'is were especially interested in the oneness of mankind, race unity. We had what they call a riot, a severe riot, in 1908 here in Springfield. And the Black community was completely devastated. Blacks were run out of Springfield. There were lynchings, and it was a horrible time. those people who became Baha'is in 1919 lived very near the Black community. And I think that it made their direction in life to promote the oneness of mankind. And in fact, the NAACP was formed as a result of the Springfield riot. So we have quite a history here. The early Baha'is were mostly German and lived in a neighborhood, a German neighborhood. When they began teaching, at one point, the family was evicted from a house. And it didn't stop them. All 5 of those people who became Baha'is on May 23rd lived to be Baha'is the rest of their lives and to promote this oneness of mankind. So we have very rich history in this. As I said, Louis Gregory came 3 times, corresponded with the Baha'is. And when the first Race Amity Day came, we started our public race unity work. And for years we had picnics. And for years after that, we held a rally under the dome of the state capitol, really with very big crowds. But these were early years, and they were events. So we finally decided the events were not enough. And we began to reach out to the community. We're a small community. And we began to reach out to the larger community. And we have been successful in this. We had a large meeting, which members of the civil government attended, the school board attended, state police attended. And from this, we formed conversation groups. We had about 12 conversation groups. We tried to have Baha'is become a member of each one, but they were not, we weren't always successful in that. And some of the groups began to fall away. Right now we have 3 very active conversation groups. We come together, we follow a pattern of getting to know each other. We don't allow any politics. We don't allow any bashing, race bashing. And we try to have people bond together. And this has been successful, as I said, in 3 groups. After a while, the groups take on a project. And we've had several projects. One of them was raising money and purchasing books for a school that had no ethnic diversity books in its library. And they were able to raise over $500 for books, which then the school board purchased, and they got a lot more books than what you could have bought them yourself. Another group began the after-school program in the 21st Century program, which is federally funded after-school program. and it's called the Unity Group. This next year, we started a curriculum, which I'm a part of that, but the curriculum was designed by a person who wasn't a Baha'i. And part of the curriculum includes quotations from famous people. And this non-Baha'i included quotations from Baha'u'llah, which the children read and comment on. They have a little session where they talk. This has gone so well that we started this as a pilot project. We're hoping to get it into more schools this next year. But it has been very successful, and hopefully we can continue. So these are just a few things that we're able to do, but it's actually hands-on projects within the community, one-on-one types of things, because we did the other things before. And now we're doing this. We'll see where it goes.
That is so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Gwen, for asking her to speak up. That is really nice.
Information. That was really fantastic information. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, we've been here about an hour. It's just after 8. Does anyone else have anything they really want to say before we close?
I just want to, I'm curious, Cynthia, what part of the country are you in?
I just figured out how to unmute myself. So I'm in just south of Washington, D.C. in Springfield, Virginia. And we've been doing race unity devotions here for a while. And they're going pretty well. Sometimes a few more people and sometimes not. I hope that we will be able to do more with those as time goes on. Mary Lou, that was very inspiring. We'll try to work on more of it here. You know, our programs with our junior youth, we have 2. And one of them is in a, they're both in immigrant neighborhoods, but one of them is primarily from Africa. So we have that going that a lot of different people are participating in, and it's very very inspiring. It's only been going on for, I think, a year now. The other one has been going on much longer. So, you know, we'll see where those go.
It's exciting to see what all people are doing. I should add that we had Gwen Etter-Lewis speak for our Race Unity celebration here in South Bend, Indiana, about 3 weeks ago, and we had a lot of people, and it was a great success, plus a fireside the night before. So that was our big event for the summer. And now we're going to probably use that hall to do a movie, The Gate, in the fall as well, to continue to build contacts in amongst our community here.
Something we did in our Baha'i community, it was called Table Talks, and there's a format to it. It's basically for anyone in the community, greater community, Nashville area, who would like to come, and we had people from different faiths come and participate. And to begin to open up. It was a series of 3 conversations to begin to look at the blocks that we have as individuals, to having a more open attitude about people of diversity, and what we can do to be closer and understand each other better. And the format was so gentle that people really enjoyed the process. And our Baha'i community is going to continue those table talks just within the Baha'i community itself, because we feel that there's a need for all of us to be able to feel freer to express what we need in community activities, whether it be feast or whatever, so that everybody really feels representative and feels comfortable celebrating their own cultures and embraces each other. So I'm looking forward to that.
That sounds interesting. It's something I'd like to hear more about, because in one of the communities near where I live, this is something that they've been having a problem really talking and beginning to talk. You know, we have feasts, but we don't necessarily open up at feast on this sort of thing. So I'd be really interested to hear more about that if you can.
I will be glad to send you information. And it is a very gentle process, very loving, very gentle, and very beautiful. I'll be glad to share the information with you.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just share it
Just
with
post it.
with all of us. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just post it.
I have one quick question before we go that maybe someone on the faculty could respond to. One of the concerns that I have, and I was just asking to Charlotte about this, is I moved here to Albuquerque 4 years ago from New Jersey. And obviously the diversity is much, much greater in on the East Coast, and the number of African Americans is much larger. Whereas here in Albuquerque and New Mexico generally, there's a very small number of African Americans. We do have an influx of many African immigrants at this point, but I'm just wondering, I don't know, maybe I don't see it. Charlotte's been here a lot longer, but I'm just wondering how receptive people in our community would be to the idea of us having an emphasis on racism as it affects African Americans. Because I feel like a lot of times when you talk about that issue with people here, you get pushback about, well, the Native Americans, this and that, or the Hispanics, or this and that. And how do we balance that, you know, that pushback? Because Hermione made a comment that I responded to about how, and she quoted from the writings, about how the race question between black and whites is the primary question, and when that falls away, that other forms of it would fall away. So I'm just wondering about the balance.
Gwen, would you like to speak to that?
I think one thing that I would say is that it is a difficult situation given that part of the country. But I also know that there is a population of African Americans in that part of the country who would be deeply grateful to know that there's a group of people out there who are advocating for race unity. And so, you know, again, it's hard to step in someone's shoes in that respect, but I think that it would be a great service to the African American community to pay some attention to them, because given the diversity of Albuquerque, and I've only been out there a couple of times, it may be a group that's quite honestly overlooked.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they're 3% of the population, there's 1 million people in Albuquerque area. And when you go to the Black churches, there are thousands of people there, you know, so they're there. I think the issues that we have had, like we had a gospel event at the Baha'i Center a few years ago, and we invited choirs from several Black churches. And, but I think that our biggest obstacle with that is just that I don't know how else to say, except they're pretty hardcore Christians. And it's that whole thing you come up with when you approach Christians more than that they're black. They're Christian, and they're just kind of hardcore about that. I don't know how else to say it in a more gentle way, but that, because I have many African American friends, but they are not very open to the Baha'i. I mean, I've invited, they've come, some of them have come. One did become a Baha'i, but not because of me, but just because. But, you know, it's just a hard group here. And I think it has more to do with the ingrainment of Christian values in that community.
And the same thing is true, actually, of the Latino population
Yes,
here, being staunchly Catholic.
Yeah.
That makes it really difficult.
Yes, that is a challenge for both.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we talked about in South Bend was a couple of things. One, you know, exploring different activities that maybe Baha'is could participate in with the other groups. But the other thing that we talked about is consistency, that whatever we do, you know, whatever reaction we get, we're consistent. We're there every Friday or whatever the case may be. And that alone sometimes kind of breaks the ice for hardcore groups. But I certainly agree with you that it is difficult to sometimes to teach hardcore Christians, but it can be done.
Yeah. Yes.
And another thought is sometimes we're not reaching out to teach, but to change a culture through the writings of Baha'u'llah. So it's not that we want everybody to become a Baha'i. Not everybody's going to become a Baha'i. But wow, we sure are going to need a lot of friends, you know. And the more friends we make, the better everybody's going to be. So we're sharing the Baha'i faith through who we are and how we relate to other people. And they don't necessarily have to be a Baha'i. I have a neighbor across the street, since we moved here 3 years ago, very strong Baptist. And I thought when I told her I was a Baha'i, she would just disappear. But I didn't tell her I was a Baha'i until I knew her for 2 years. So we had developed a very strong friendship. She's my best friend. She's not going to disappear. But she's not going to come to the Baha'i Center, but we're very good friends. And she's learning about the Baha'i faith by what I do and who I am. So that's good.
That's true. Good point.
Great point. Yes. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki, for organizing this and reminding all of us when it was happening and chairing it. I think you do a good job of chairing, and I'd rather just listen.
Okay. Well, we meet again in 2 weeks. Not the following Sunday, but the Sunday after that. And we could have another one because, you know, we deliberately only made 3 webinars for the course. We didn't know how it would go. But I think, you know, we could do with another one because the next one will be after we've finished, 5 and 6, and we still have units 7 and 8 to go through before we get to unit 9, which is the closing unit. So, yeah, so I can set that up and set up the invitation. Thank you, everybody. We'll be putting this online so that those who didn't attend can watch it.
The readings for unit 5, I noticed that I was trying to print them and only 2 or 3 of them were available. So are they going to be posted today or tomorrow, or? I think it's
5. Okay, let me have a look at that tonight and see if anything needs fixing.
Yeah. They're all supposed to be there, but sometimes the links don't travel from the previous iteration of the course. And it's often hard for us to test them because if we click on them, they'll work because we were in the previous course too. So we can go to the previous course and open them. So if you ever find a link that doesn't work, put it up on the forum and we'll get it fixed probably within a few hours.
Okay, I'll do that when I get back home because I was only able to print I think it was 2 or 3 of the 5 readings.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, these are the one that I initially printed.